Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of GDDV 106, Development Concepts. My name is Kasanis. Guys, we're moving along pretty darn well here. We're moving through scripting, and I hope those of you who have never scripted before are not having too hard of a time with this. Let's take a look at what we've done so far. We actually went through and did a course intro, and we talked about the Unity interface. We talked about an introduction to scripting, including things like data types, as well as functions, as well as the idea of object-oriented programming in general. We've already taken a look at some of our logical statements, so our conditional statements through if, switch, as well as our ternary operator. And today we're going to move on to the idea of looping statements. So we're going to continue on with control and move on to our looping statements. All right, let's get started. Okay, so loops. That sounds fun, doesn't it? Loops. Just that word sounds fun. Fruit Loops and hula hoops and whatever. It sounds fun. Loops. Let's move on to loops. So today we're going to explore a number of different loops that are available within C#. We're going to talk about the for loop, the Foreach loop, the while loop, and the DoWhile loop. So we're going to talk about all of these things. And regardless of which one we're talking about, they kind of do the same thing. They allow us to execute the same batch of code over and over and over again, based on how many times you loop through that particular code. It's far easier to utilize a loop statement and execute the code over and over again than it is to write the code 15 times, right? If you wanted to do the same thing 15 times, you could either write that same code out 15 times in a row, and then later on when you had to try and correct that particular issue, if you had something that was occurring within that code that you didn't like and you had to go through and correct it, you'd have to go through and correct it all 15 times. However, utilizing a loop statement will allow you to write the code once and go through that code several times. If there's an error in it, you can make one correction and it will fix all 15 iterations of that particular code cycle. A loop will continue either till it's completed, until it's gone through whatever conditions we've got set up for it to complete, or until it reaches a break keyword. The break keyword will allow a loop to exit early. So we can stop the execution of loop early by utilizing the break command. And we'll take a look at the break command a little bit later on. Let's start off right now with the idea of for loops. So for loops themselves are pretty straightforward. Basically, a for loop works as follows. You've got a particular condition, and as long as that particular condition is true, then our for loop will continue to operate. Once the condition is no longer true, then the for loop will end, we'll break out of that code and go on to our next bunch of code. Now, like I said previously, you can absolutely use a break to end a for loop early as well. The for loop has the following structure. For with an open parentheses and then an iterator value, a condition, and a change iterator or iterate your iterator or whatever you want to say there with a closed parentheses. And then again, we've got ourselves our braces to define the scope of our for loop. Just like with other things we've spoken about, the if statement, for example, if you decide you don't want to use the braces, you absolutely don't have to if you've only got one line of code. If you've got one line of code, the for loop will only run that one line of code over and over again. But if you have multiple lines of code, then you do require the braces in order to make sure that the lines of code are encased within the scope of the for loop. So as long as the condition is true, then the loop will continue to execute. As soon as the condition is false, then it will stop execution. And it's really important to note that with the for loop, the condition is checked before the first time the code is run. It checks it the very first time, and if the condition is true, it goes in and it runs the code. However, if the very first time it checks before the code's even been run, if the condition is false, then it will not actually run this code at all. Oh, here's an example of our for loop, and this is the way we're going to use them. For, open parentheses, int I equals 0, semicolon, I is less than 10, semicolon, I plus plus, close parentheses, and our braces then do something. So we've defined an integer within here that's equal to 0. So we've declared the integer, and we have initialized the integer to a value of 0. Afterwards, we have our conditional statement that I is less than 10. And with each loop, it's going to come back here and it's going to recheck this condition. And with each loop, it's going to increment the value of I. So I plus plus, we spoke about this in an earlier video, I plus plus means I equals I plus 1. Okay, it doesn't increment the value of I until it comes back into the loop the first time. So the first time our I is going to have a value of 0. So in this particular example, our for loop will run a total of 10 times, with I having values between 0 and 9. Okay, so that's how it's going to run. In this particular case, we have I++, which increments by 1, but if you wanted to have some kind of crazy equation in there where it goes through and has these weird numbers that are being generated until eventually it's going to be, greater than 10, then you could absolutely do so. You don't actually have to have a simple I++ there. Okay, so let's go on now. This is the simplest form of it, the for loop. In my opinion, this is the simplest form of it. Let's go on and take a look at the for each loop. And the for each loop is utilized to work its way through an array. And basically the way that the code works is for each element of a particular array, it's going to execute a batch of code. Okay, it's going to take the following format. For each, and then we have the word type, name, and in this array, do something. So for each, it's going to say for each, whatever the element is in array, do something. Okay, that's how it's going to work. And we're going to take a look at an example of that right now. An example would be if I had myself an array, an integer array here. My numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would say for each, open parentheses, int value, value being the values within the array, the elements within the array, in my numbers, then print the value. What this is going to do is it's going to print the value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the console. It's just going to print each one on a new line. Okay, so this example is going to run through the values 1 through 5. All right, the next idea I want to talk about is the while loop. And the while loop is, again, it's very interesting. As long as the condition is true, or while the condition is true, it's going to continue to do something. So again, there's no iterator here. We don't run through things a set number of times. Just as long as a condition is true, then we are going to do whatever's within the scope of the while loop. Okay, this is the structure of the while loop. While, open parentheses, condition true, close parentheses, open brace, do something, close brace. So we've defined our scope again with the braces, and as long as that condition is true, it will continuously loop forever. Now, in this particular case, the while loop, with the while loop, the regular while loop, the condition is tested before the code is run, just like in the for loop. So before the code is run, it's going to test whether or not the condition is true. If it is true, then it's going to actually run the code, and if it's not, it's never, ever, ever going to run the code. So it's absolutely possible that the code within your curly braces will never run. All right, if the condition is not true, anything within the scope of the while loop will never run. Okay, so in the while loop, it's tested first. Now, it's really important to take note, and this is something that can happen if you never change the condition of your while loop. So you never change the condition. As long as it's true, it will continue to run forever. Okay, if you do not change that value from true to false, then you can have what's called an infinite loop, and that just means it's going to run forever and ever and ever, never stop until your computer burns to the ground. Okay, guys, so be really careful about utilization of the while loop and make sure you understand what is changing your condition. All right, you have to do something to check that condition. It's going to check that condition each and every time, and if it doesn't change, it's never going to stop. All right, you can utilize a break statement to allow you to jump out early, but without a break statement that lets you jump out early, if that condition remains true for always, you're going to have an infinite loop going on there. Okay, the last one I want to talk about is the DoWhile loop. And the DoWhile loop is very similar to the while loop. The real difference between these two is that the DoWhile loop does not check the condition first. So the code is always run at least once. The condition is checked after the code is run for the first time, and then each iteration through the code, it will check upon the completion of the code. All right, so it's always going to run the code at least one time. This is the structure of the DoWhile loop. Do something, and then while the condition is true. Now, we have exactly the same problem here, right? We can still run into that same situation where the condition is checked and it's always true. So we can end up with an infinite loop as well within here. All right, guys. So the difference between the DoWhile and the while loop is that with a DoWhile, the code is always run at least one time, and the condition is not checked until after the code has been run at least once. All right, guys, let's head over into Unity and take a look at an example of all of our different loops. Okay guys, here we are back inside of Unity, back inside our Dev Concepts project, and inside of our week 3 scene once again. I haven't made a whole lot of changes. I did make some adjustments to our array demonstration just so that we could really focus on our loops. All right, so let's open this up and take a look at what we've got here. We still have my integer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to be utilizing these values to go through our loops. Let's scroll down here and see what we've got. I've removed most of the code. The only thing I have left here is our loops. All right, so print our for example. For int I equals 0, colon I is less than my integer value length, and I++, and I'm just printing it out each and every time. So in this particular example, what I'm doing to make sure that I stay within the limits of my array elements, I'm examining the length of the array, and then I'm looping that many times, all right? So there are 5 values within my array. I'm going from 0, and I'm going up to the value of 5. As long as I is less than 5, it's going to continue to print it out. So I should see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it should jump out of my for example. In the for each example, I've got exactly the same thing. These two loops do exactly the same thing. For each integer value inside of my integer, where value is equal to the array elements, it is printing out the value. So you can see that they do exactly the same thing, but this is a safer version. The for each is kind of a safer version when we're talking about an array. You can't go outside of the array elements, all right? You can go outside of the array elements within the for loop, but you can't really go outside of the array elements in the for each loop. Again, we're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These two are exactly the same. Okay, let's take a look at the while and the do while. In the while example, I'm setting an integer, I'm declaring integer j equal to 0, and I'm looping through all of the values of my integer. And as long as the values of my integer, the elements have a value less than 5, it's going to remain within this loop. Now, this is bad structure, guys. This is really bad structure. If this was actual code that I was writing to do anything other than demonstrate this, I would not do this, right? I'm absolutely dependent on the fact that my integer has a value that is going to be later on greater than 5, or at least 5 or greater, right? If it didn't, then I would never leave this while loop. I would be stuck in this while loop infinitely. So this is kind of bad logic. I'm trusting the fact that my integer is going to have a value that is 5 or greater. Otherwise, I'm stuck in here. And again, I'm printing out my j values and I'm incrementing it every single time. So I'm printing out, I should see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, let's go down here and take a look at our do while. Same thing. Again, same problem here. I could end up infinitely in my loop. What I'm doing is I'm printing the value, then I'm incrementing j, then I'm comparing the j value to a value less than 5. I should see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this case, these are exactly the same as well. The last thing we're taking a look at here is our nested loop option. And I didn't talk about nested loops inside of the lecture, but I'm talking about it here. So I'm glad you watched until this point. Nested loops means that we can actually put our loop inside of a loop. We can put a for inside of a for or whatever you want, right? In this particular case, all I did is I grabbed the code from up here from my for and my each, and I dumped it into here. Now, what I did is I nested the for each loop inside of the for loop. So every time it goes through the for loop once, it's going to run through the entirety of the for each loop. So it's going to say running nested loop 1, and then all the values for the for each loop. And then it's going to say running nested value 2, and then it's going to do all the values for each loop. So I should see running nested loop 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, running nested loop 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through until the end of this initial for loop. So I've got a loop inside of a loop, okay, a nested loop. So let's make sure this is saved. I'm going to go File, and I'm going to say Save, and then we're going to head back into Unity, and we're going to check to make sure this is working as we expect. All right, I'm going to hit play. And I am seeing the for example 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for each example 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, while example 1, 2, 3, 4, do while 1, 2, 3, 4. Now remember, the condition for the while and do while was that the value of the element was less than 5. Our last element is actually 5, so therefore it jumps out. Okay. Then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then lastly we have our running nested loop, and we can see running nested loop 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then running nested loop 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on all the way to the end. All right, so that is working exactly as we expect, which is great. Okay, let's clear this out. Now, what I want to do is I want to make a quick adjustment to the code and demonstrate for you what will happen as far as the do and the do while when the conditions are examined before or after, right? So let's just go into our array demonstration. Let's open it back up and let's make a quick change to our do while and our while loop. So right now we're checking to make sure that the integer value is less than 5, and 5 is our final value. So let's change this to a value of 1. Okay, and change our integer down here to a value of 1. So what's going to happen is in the while loop, our very first integer value, the very first element of our array is actually 1. So we're not going to see anything at all print out as far as our while loop is concerned. But let's see what's going to happen as far as our do while is concerned. We're going to come into our do while, it's going to print out the value, and then afterwards it's going to compare. And it's going to compare the second element, which is actually greater than 1, it's a value of 2, and it's going to kick out then. But what we're going to see is we're going to see the first value of our do while, and we're going to see no values at all of our while. Okay, so let's simply say file, and let's simply save it all. So save all. And let's head back into Unity right now. And let's clear this because I hate seeing all those warnings. And let's hit play. And let's see what we get. Okay, so our for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for our for each. Here is our while loop, and there is nothing here, right? It didn't run even once. And here's our do while, and it only ran the one time. So our while loop didn't run at all, even though it's exactly the same condition. And our while loop didn't run at all, and our do while loop ran one time. All right, that's exactly what we were expecting to see. All right, everyone, that takes us to the end of this episode, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that it was helpful to you and that you were able to follow along with the idea of loops. Loops are very powerful. They allow us to create snippets of code that we can run over and over and over again. All right, guys? If you liked it, let me know down below with a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. Let me know what you didn't like. I can't make any changes. If you just give me a thumbs down, I won't know what I have to change and how I can make you happy. So let me know in the comments what you think I need to change. All right, guys? Anyway, thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.